I'm Bruce Broder, President of the Museum of Political Corruption, and I am delighted to welcome you here this evening to the 9th Annual Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting. 9 years. Yeah. I am so glad you could join us tonight for what is sure to be an amazing program, and that's a fact. This evening, we celebrate the legacy of the great 19th century reporter Nellie Bly, and we honor the outstanding work of veteran journalist and fact-checker Glenn Kessler. Now, for the one or two of you out there who might be new to the Museum of Political Corruption, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to educating and empowering the public by providing a better understanding of corruption. From our newly designed 3D virtual halls of shame and honor to our Thomas Nast Gallery of political cartoons, our museum is online at your fingertips and open to you anytime at museumofpoliticalcorruption.org. Also, while you're here, please stop by our table in the back. We've got brochures, we've got merch, everything you need to become a true museum co-conspirator. So, we've already toasted Glenn with some refreshments. In a moment, we'll honor his work with an honest public conversation about our current media landscape. As we know all too well, information is a powerful commodity. It can be used to enlighten, but it can also be used corruptly to gain or maintain power. So tonight, we're going to face facts. Facts are facts. Or as New York Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan put it, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. Yes. Right. To which I would add, not even alternative facts. The Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting was established to honor those who embrace the spirit of fearless inquiry, those who ask hard questions and follow the facts wherever they lead. Before I bring Glenn up here, some important and heartfelt thank yous. I'd like to thank the Times Union for making this beautiful Hearst Media Center available to us this evening. I'd also like to thank the League of Women Voters of Albany County for their continued partnership and shared commitment to civic engagement. And of course, a special shout out to Nomi Manon for providing the delicious catering for our reception. And now, permit me to make this personal appeal. Like any museum, especially in these times, we rely on the generosity of those who believe in our mission. So we invite your support through volunteering, spreading the word, or making a contribution to help us grow. This year, we are proud to honor Glenn Kessler. In a career spanning more than 4 decades, Glenn has covered foreign policy, economic policy, the White House, and Congress. From 2011 to 2025, he served as editor and chief writer of the Fact Checker column, making him one of the pioneers of political fact-checking. His commitment to accuracy and journalistic integrity reminds us that truth still matters. Facts still matter, and the future of our democracy depends on both. It is therefore with deep admiration that we now present Glenn Kessler with the 2025 Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting. Please join me in congratulating him.
I'll just make a few quick remarks. So thank you, Bruce, and thank you to the Museum of Political Corruption and to the committee that selected me for this wonderful honor. Most of the previous winners are heroes of mine, and I'm thrilled to be in the same company. I especially appreciate the recognition that political fact-checking is a form of investigative reporting. As Bruce mentioned, I was a pioneer in this field long before there were hundreds of political fact-checkers in scores of countries around the globe. And I always argued that we were investigative reporters. So this validation was greatly appreciated by my colleagues in the international fact-checking community. Now, when Bruce emailed me with the news, I still work for the Washington Post. As many of you know, the Post offered just about every reporter and editor a voluntary buyout package. I didn't plan to leave, but after I crunched the numbers, I realized it would be financially reckless to turn it down. So I left the Post at the end of July, and like just about everyone else, I started a Substack, where I still dabble in fact-checking while working on book projects. I was given extraordinary freedom while running the fact-checker for 15 years. Complete authority to select the targets and render the famous Pinocchio verdicts. My editors implicitly trusted me to be fair and accurate, and my articles were often the most read on the Washington Post website. I used to say it was the best job in journalism. Unfortunately, as far as I know, the new Post management has not selected a replacement or even decided whether to continue the feature, which I think is a tragedy, especially in an era of lies and when democracy is under assault. Thank you very much.
And now, before I hand things over to Casey, we have a tradition we need to fulfill. Back in 1888, Nellie Bly, the pioneering journalist, came up to Albany because she heard there was corruption up here. Who knew? She posed as a lobbyist because she heard that it was possible to purchase the New York State legislature, which she found to be true. And she was able to get a bribe across to have a particular bill killed. She paid the sum of $1,250 for that. I assume our legislature costs a little bit more these days, given inflation. So in honor of that, we have affixed our honorarium for the Nellie Bly Award at $1,250. Besides, that's all we could afford anyway. But the tradition starts here. Back in 2017, when we had our inaugural award for Suzanne Craig of the Times, we presented her the honorarium under the table, and we have done that tradition ever since. That is why Glenn is sitting right there, and you are all witnesses to this. It is once So, without further ado, we are delighted to welcome our moderator for the evening, Casey Seiler, editor of the Times-Union, who will introduce our outstanding panel of journalists. Casey, the floor is yours. Well, actually, the walls are yours, and the ceiling is yours.
Mr. Hearst's
walls. So, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate Bruce and the museum's outstanding journalism pickers, whose taste is impeccable. You mentioned Suzanne Craig, who Karen DeWitt and I worked with down at the Capitol. If Suzanne were here today, I'm sure she would be very proud to be in this company and very proud to be sued by President Donald Trump only a couple of weeks ago, although that case was tossed out. So with no further ado, I would invite my other panelists to please join us on stage. And I will introduce them. Karen, yes, please. Karen DeWitt, who served for more than 3 decades as Capitol correspondent and later bureau chief for the New York Public News Network. Among Karen's richly deserved awards, she earlier this year received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Radio Television Digital News Association. With that kind of resume, it goes without saying that you can read her column monthly in the Times-Union. And down at the end, Sarah Gilbert, who for a little bit more than a year now has been president and CEO of WAMC, which just completed a fantastically successful pledge drive, driven, of course, by many of the sentiments that have brought you fine people here today. After starting her career with the BBC's international desk in London and Brussels, Sarah moved to the U.S. in 2006 to work for the BBC, then American Public Media, and then NPR, where her roles included supervising senior editor of Weekend Edition, executive producer of Morning Edition, and Vice President of News Programming before coming here to grace us in the Capital Region. I would like to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight to talk about facts. So my first question, and we do want to allow time at the end for audience questions, but what is lost when a falsehood goes unchallenged in the public sphere? Glenn, you won the award, so sorry.
Well, when a falsehood is unchallenged, it has the capability to go around and become truth more quickly. I mean, one of the problems we face right now, which I've witnessed over the course of my career, is access to the internet allows these lies to go around in hypersphere. I mean, Ben Bradley, the former editor of the Post, used to say that a lie goes around the world before the truth even gets its pants on. And he said that in an analog era. So, and what you can see these days is, I mean, I did one piece about having to do with some comments that a senator made about how all sorts of athletes were dropping dead on the field because of COVID. That started with some sketchy website run by the far-right party of Austria and made its way into some, across the pond to the U.S. to some websites and then into the mouth of a senator. So if you don't challenge that and combat it, it's going to stay out there and become more real in people's minds.
Karen?
I guess I was thinking about the larger picture of what's lost with a falsehood, and that would be, shared reality, democracy, society, right? It's just so completely corrosive, especially what is going on right now. In fact, I have a younger person in my life that through no fault of their own is not really keeping up in the news, and just in the last 2 days has texted me to say, is President Trump giving everybody a $2,000 rebate? Is he going to allow Zepbound and Wegovy for the price to come down to $150?
I just want to make it clear, you're looking at me, but I am not the person that you're talking
about. I know. And I feel like even just saying this, I hope nobody from here goes home and says, hey, we're going to get a $2,000 check. But it's just so corrosive. It's unfathomable.
Yes, to all of that. I mean, my colleagues basically nailed it. I would say one final thought on that, which is what's lost is any sense of accountability in those who would peddle these untruths. And so what happens is that there is less and less hesitation in coming out with some outrageous porkies, as they would say, where I come from. And watching the explosion of that over the past few years has just been horrifying, I think.
So that's a perfect segue. Not only is there no accountability, but in some quarters there is actually reward to there is a sort of inverse reward system to putting out, as Sarah put it, porkies. And Glenn, I believe in your farewell piece in the Post, you shared an anecdote about essentially I believe, was it a congressman's aide who essentially said, no, we'd rather take the ding of getting wrapped by the elite media, that we can wear that like a badge of honor?
It may have been in that piece, yes. I gave these Pinocchios, depending on how bad the lie was. But I always had an offer that if a politician admitted they were wrong, I'd still write the fact check, but I withhold the Pinocchios. And it was one of the most powerful people in Congress who said something on national TV that was wrong about Medicare. And he admitted to me that he knew it was wrong. He made a mistake, but he didn't want to admit that he was wrong. He said, I'd rather take the Pinocchios. That little rule we had, Joe Biden used that to great effect. Because when he was running against Trump, every time I called him, it looks like 4 Pinocchios. Oh no, I was wrong. He was quick to say that. I don't know if it necessarily helped him.
I think you said in your article that politicians used to actually care if they had Pinocchios, right? Like Barack Obama would, be embarrassed, right?
Yeah,
That was not long ago.
Yeah, and Mitt Romney wasn't that long ago. I mean, there was a famous ad guy for forget who it was, but he was quoted as saying, he was doing these attack ads. He said, "You're not doing your job right if you're not getting 4 Pinocchios."
Seriously?
Yeah.
Is this really a situation that breaks down left-right? In other words, is the reward structure better among far-right conservatives, or does this exist on the left, on the progressive side as well? Or is this really more, right now at least, more pernicious on the right side of the aisle?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, either side will stretch the truth if they think it gives them a political advantage. And, both sides have their kind of go-to lies. Like the Democrats are always going to attack someone with some sort of made-up thing about Social Security, privatization, or something like that. And the Republicans will often run to, immigration, legal immigration. They got the standard sticks they use to motivate their voters or to turn off other voters. That being said, I feel like something has shifted in the last few years. And you talk about a reward incentive. There's definitely a reward incentive, and people have made lots and lots of money by spreading falsehoods, particularly on the right, and they can monetize these lies. And they raise lots of money, and they become rather rich, and and there's no consequence to them saying that. I was actually surprised when I checked into my hotel here today that in the front there, as I walked in, there was a huge stack of Epoch Times newspapers available for free. And just about every story on it was hyped up and made up, or extremely pro the administration in ways that didn't make much sense. But I was just like, there it is, free. Anyone could grab that and get that propaganda.
There's also a difference between stretching the truth, which I was familiar with all my years of being a journalist, and just telling outright lies and not caring, which is very different. And I think even in the almost year and a half that I haven't been working full-time in the news business, I've seen that increase and accelerate. And yeah, I don't have any good answers of how to deal with it, really. But Casey's going to try to get us to have some good answers.
It's a good answer.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think part of the problem here is that what's going on is that the conversation around what's true and what isn't, and what is a fact and what isn't, has become obsessed with trying to interpret people's intentions, which allows those who want to weaponize these conversations to ratchet up the emotional value of them, and then it turns into a screaming match, which is of course exactly what drives algorithms to get people to keep consuming things which are at the highest possible emotional kind of voltage. So there's something funny going on there. But the other point that I wanted to make is that I think the reason why politicians are quite happy to sidestep a fact check and just keep going with the falsehoods is that fact checks can be found in certain places and not in others. And the places where the falsehoods, shall we say, go unchecked are social media and their own channels, and that is where a lot of people get their news these days. They're not going to traditional outlets like the ones that we all work for. Their people are literally skimming headlines, opinions, mixing the two, getting all sorts of skewed information on social media, and there just isn't a reliable way to catch all of the falsehoods in those particular platforms.
Right. I mean, this is the tyranny of social media. Because the other thing is, the more you click on a particular thing, the algorithm will give you more of the same. And in the old days, your general newspaper or your news channel would have a variety of different things, and you discover that there was news you didn't know you cared about that would be right there. But now you can just set up your Substack or followers or your X account or your Blue Sky account and only follow people you're interested in, or the things that you're only interested in. You don't get the kind of department store news that a newspaper used to provide. And then the more you look at that stuff, the more social media sends you the stuff that it thinks you want to read.
Right, the algorithms are just so poisonous. And I find that, like, I hate to click on anything on Facebook or Instagram because then I just get more and more and more of it. And sometimes I do forget, oh, I should look and, see what someone else is doing or search my contacts. And you're just like fed it like a stream, especially Instagram. I mean, I don't know, maybe because I'm old or something, but I just am finding it dizzying lately. Because it's not just like, it used to be like the calm place to go to look at like people's nice pictures, and now it's just constant like little snippets and reels, and you don't get the full story at all on anything. And even the major news organizations that use it now, like the New York Times, I think uses it pretty effectively. You still only get, partial information.
Right.
It's just, yeah.
So to that point, Jay Rosen, outspoken, recently departed from NYU faculty journalism professor, on social media, out of nowhere, zapped me a link to a piece by a scholar at, I believe, the Reuters Foundation, that suggested that when engaging with false statements made by populists, and the definition he made of populists is several criteria for that you should practice what is known as a harm reduction model for engaging with those statements, that kind of content. The argument being that this category of politicians or pundits or what have you delight in being rebuked by, for want of a better term, the mainstream media, or by fact checkers or journalists, period, who they delight in casting as being, elites, and enthralled to whatever interest the populist politician is not enthralled to. Is that and the techniques involve, the balance of ignoring a statement because merely engaging with it elevates it, right? And or using a very careful structure in how you debunk something, the so-called truth sandwich, which is, I'm going to tell you the truth, here is the lie that is being spread around. Just to remind you what the truth is again, here it is. That those tactics are more and more necessary, considering that we are up against exactly what Karen was describing.
Right. I mean, I had seen that rubric before, and there are some very good points in that. I mean, in particular, you don't want to elevate something that not a lot of people are watching it, and we tried to be very careful at that at the Washington Post. But you can't ignore what the President of the United States says. He is the biggest megaphone on the face of the earth, and everything he says gets heard around the world. So it's a difference between trying to debunk or deal with the things that Trump says versus what some low-level social media account might say.
It's especially difficult if you're a broadcast journalist or a radio journalist doing the truth sandwich, as Casey says, because you need to play the audio clip,
Right.
the soundbite. And I know I've experienced that where I'm going to set it up like, this isn't true, and this person is saying this. Then you have them say it, and then you talk about why it's not true, interview other people. But I feel like people listening to the radio, they might be tuning in and only hear part of it. And because it's public radio, they think, well, that must be true if I heard it on public radio. And I feel like it just amplifies what they say, and it just plays right into their hands. And I found that quite a bit in recent years as that went on, to the point where sometimes I noticed it more with Republicans in the state assembly and Senate, they would have these lengthy press conferences, and they'd get to sort of the end, and they'd have these couple of senators and assembly members, and they would say things that were just not true at all. And I was just ignoring it, and I knew that was just a temporary solution because I didn't want to amplify it. But, that was one way of doing it. But then, I'm sure on social media, they amplified it on their feeds, so people saw that. So, it is difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah, I think it is incredibly difficult. And I think if any of us genuinely had an answer about how to handle this stuff, we'd not be here. We'd be telling all of the other journalists how to do it. I must admit, I found the sort of if this then that aspect of the grid to be, I wish it were as simple as just saying, if this occurs, then do that, and if this occurs, then do that. I think we're in a world where the whole concept of anyone expressing any expertise with authority is now in lots of quarters automatically dismissed, yes. And that means that if you are going to speak with any real hope of convincing people of something which you believe to be true, then you really have to demonstrate how you came to know it and talk with genuine authenticity. But it's just an incredibly difficult environment. The best way that I have found to think about it is really to just try to embed this in as much context as possible and talk about the consequences and the results of what is being said. If you focus on the results of what the person is intending to convey and how that might play out, then I think it's more engaging for people to get their heads around. It sort of provokes curiosity, as opposed to, in many cases, just getting people to turn off if you start trying to, pull the authority trick.
Right, and I do think we have to recognize that for many people that are now consuming information, they are not getting that kind of nuance and discussion that we're talking about from the news sources. So, a particularly pernicious thing is re-editing, or I was reminded of this because you mentioned the kind of crazy stuff these people would say at the end of the news conference. They put it into a clip that then goes onto TikTok. And, during the impeachment hearings, the first one for Trump, not the second one, but the first one, they would repeatedly cut and snip certain things and put it on social media that made it, would sell the Trump's message, and we'd be completely opposite of what actually occurred. And it was very difficult to write. You could write a fact check about that, but people would see the video, and the video is so powerful. And this was something that the late Charlie Kirk did to great effect, where he would have these debates with left-wing people at college campuses, and his team would edit those things so that always it appeared on TikTok as he always won the debate. He always defeated the liberals, even though in most cases, if you actually looked at the full view thing, he didn't necessarily handle himself that well against people that disagreed with him. But what mattered was the image that was left and that what people would see, and they saw that. They never saw the full debate. And they wouldn't necessarily read like an article that said, well, he didn't do that well in that debate. They would just see the thing that made him look like a hero.
Well, and the debate format, that kind of speed chess debating style that Charlie Kirk was known for, Mehdi Hassan, just a couple of weeks ago did one of those surrounded sessions that I watched, which was very entertaining, but I'm not exactly sure that it was very enlightening, because of course when you're debating, facts can go out the window, and you can clean them up and investigate the facts that are, or the statements that are deployed to see whether they're factual or not after the fact. I certainly wasn't doing that. I was just taking it all in, and it was the elevation of kind of performance style over kind of factual rigor. And it's just sort of a category error. But to your point, the idea of these videos being produced, of course, we are living sort of on the cusp of the AI revolution, which could change the way we do everything, and of course, for the apperception of reality could be even more debilitating and painful and tumultuous than anything we've been through over the course of the last, 15 years since the rise of social media. Does that scare you all the most? Well, okay.
No, it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
No, I'm scared to death.
Yeah.
Really, it's just, it's really scary what could happen. Yeah, you think social media is bad? Wait till it's all distorted by AI. It's just, how are we going to know it's real?
But my basic question is,
Sorry.
no, that's fine. What scares you the most? It doesn't have to be AI. It might be something even worse.
Just different.
You mean just in general?
It's related to the media and politics, not like a great white shark or something like that.
No, it's just really that I'm witnessing the disintegration of democracy. I mean, it's something like I gave my career to. So that really scares me the most. And I'm disturbed by people not, paying attention to legitimate news sources and just the whole existential threat of AI and just you can't have a society if you don't have shared beliefs. So what do we have? So that's what scares me the most.
Yeah, I mean, agree with all that. I mean, I think the thing that is, at least as a former news journalist, the thing that scares me the most about in general, and it involves AI, is that AI is really a complete threat to news organizations because the statistics are astonishing about how people are now using search, and it becomes sort of this, this Google AI thing or ChatGPT, and it leads to fewer and fewer clicks on news websites. People don't get past that Google summary, and I could see that at the Post this year, where even though Donald Trump was making so much more news, the traffic was going down week after week, and it was because of AI, because people they were searching for information, but they just got the summary and they never went to the Washington Post click. And that is going to be a vicious cycle where, because the AI needs fresh content, but they're not going to, newspapers start to go, are going to start to lay off people because they're not getting enough revenue, and then there'll be less content produced, and then the content that the AI will pick up will be Russian propaganda or Chinese propaganda. There was just an instance this past week where Russian propaganda had put out the story that Zelensky takes $20 million every month and puts it into a private UAE bank account. And that story was put out on sketchy Russian-linked websites, and then was picked up by Microsoft Bing as part of its AI summary. And then that was spotted by a member of Congress who said that this was true because they read it on Microsoft Bing. And then to bring it full circle, Russian newspapers said, American congressman says that Zelensky takes $20 million and puts it in the UAE. And that's going to just happen on hyperspeed as we go forward if news organizations are no longer able to fund themselves and produce the content that they're now taking for free. I mean, there might be a way to monetize that, force AI to pay for it, but probably not. Maybe not.
Now I have new things to be scared of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They're right. And that is the stuff that keeps us all awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, but I'm about to do something which is uncharacteristic for me, and that is that I'm gonna actually say something mildly optimistic. Are you ready for this?
That was my next, if you want to, that was my next question. So if you want to say what scares you the most, and then you can start by saying the thing that gives you the most hope.
All right, I'll take that deal. Apathy is the one that does my head in. When people stop caring whether or not this is true and just digest whatever comes their way for a momentary, hit of dopamine or whatever it is, that is the state in which, the sort of Orwellian state that I think I fear most. One of the things that cheers me up about that is I was reading an article recently, and in it somebody cited an entry from George Orwell's diary during World War II. And he described having gone down the pub, as is traditional in Britain, to cheer himself up. And he was in the pub, and the BBC radio was on. And it was during Dunkirk. And so the BBC was reporting this flotilla of ships that had gone out to try and bring all of these wounded soldiers, stranded soldiers back. And the populace in the pub got so bored of listening to this that they asked the publican to turn it off. But, things improved after that. People got the message, and eventually the right thing happened. And I think this is what's going to happen here too. I don't believe, in my darkest moments, I get very worried about all of this stuff, but I also think that there's a real chance that AI is so corrosive, so damaging, and has such fast and dreadful results that this could very well, not among everyone, but certainly among those who have a mind of their own and are curious and want real answers and want to engage in a real conversation, could actually reignite a hunger for the good stuff, the real stuff. And I don't think that is ever going to go away.
Reality.
Glenn, what makes you hopeful?
Well, it was an incident that made me hopeful this week, which was when seeing all the Pentagon correspondents and walk out, turn in their badges and walk out. And it might actually force better, more insightful reporting, because having covered the Pentagon and the State Department, the White House, you actually don't learn much sitting there in the building and then having to sit through the interminable briefings, which is just propaganda anyway. And if you go out and hit the pavement and find people outside the building, that's where you get the real stories. So, and there was the former chief White House correspondent of the AP, Ron Fournier, had a great suggestion this week, which is now every news organization needs to triple the staff they have covering the Pentagon. And so you might end up with better, more insightful reporting. But just the fact that so many reporters banded together and said, "This is a line we're not going to cross," I thought was a hopeful sign.
So what makes me hopeful is all the young journalists, well, younger than me, maybe not as young, working in the business who are really dedicated. For instance, Jimmy Bielkine, John Campbell, who are on Sarah's airwaves, working for the public radio stations. Raga Justin, who works for the Albany Times Union.
Just departed for Bloomberg.
Right, and Jason Bieferman, who with Politico broke the story of the New York State and other young Republicans and the racist and misogynist texts. So it just makes me hopeful that these are the kind of people, and I know all of them, who want to do good journalism more than they want to do anything else in their lives, because believe me, they could be doing a lot of other things. And so that makes me hopeful that people are still like hanging on and want to do this, and that, you know, maybe we'll come through this. Or maybe not, but maybe we probably will. We're supposed to be hopeful at the end, so yes.
Mine are, you know, all of those things. Glenn completely stole mine, which was, you know, the solidarity at the Pentagon, which was really, really remarkable. And if you saw the images of all of the reporters walking out kind of at the same time, you knew those people were having a good goddamn time. They really were. Somebody was like holding up their phone like, that's right, I'm walking out. That was really great. I am lucky because I get to do this every day, as Sarah does, and I get to work with a terrific staff of outstanding people, young journalists and older journalists. Jay Jochnowitz is here. There's Erica Smith, our managing editor for digital, in the back, who's so creative and works so hard, and Jess Marshall over here with the microphone recording this all for posterity. So I wake up and I get to say what's going to be the great story today, and I'm never disappointed. So that's all good. So that's all I've got. We would love to take questions from the audience. You, sir, raise your hand quicker than anything. And actually, Bruce, you can when you take my microphone, I'll just share it. Thank you.
Concerning journalistic standards, do you know where they're buried? No. That's just it. I thought of that all week. When I grew up, I knew that there were journalistic standards that were generally accepted amongst people who call themselves journalists. Can you refresh our memory about what those were so that we can see more vividly how they've disappeared?
Well, I'll tell you, in the editorial conference room, just off the Times Union newsroom, we have painted on there, and it was Rex Smith who thought it was a good idea, and I completely agree, it's a great idea, the 4 basic tenets of the Society of Professional Journalists Code, basically Code for Ethical Journalism. And they are, number 1, seek the truth and report it fully. Number 2, act independently. Number 3, minimize harm, not eliminate harm, but minimize harm. And number 4, be accountable. And there are all kinds of subsets to those tenets, those guidelines, but as kind of compass points for ethical journalism, they have never failed me. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say more simply, just be honest and be fair, and just keep that, in mind when you're reporting.
Jumping off that thought, wondering, could we do better in our education of K through 12, of teaching kids about journalism? I went to college, and that's when I learned about journalism. I didn't learn it in high school or elementary school. And with this day and age of social media and all these other alternatives for media and everything like that, would that help us in the long run to really focus on that?
I should be honest, that when I was in 5th grade, I created a newsletter called the Cincinnati Fact. I always wanted to be a journalist. And I was, but I think that I don't know if it's so much about teaching people about journalism, but I do feel like there's a distinct failure to teach critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what you do as a journalist is you think critically and you try to unravel things and understand why things happen and try to get to what the truth is. And I feel that I have 3 children who are now in their 20s and 30s, and they went to pretty good elementary schools and high schools, but even there was not as much focus on critical thinking. It wasn't until they got to 8th grade, and they all had the same 8th grade teacher, and she was one of those wonder kids that really forced kids to, she would force them to rewrite over and over the first paragraph. She would say, this is just mushy thinking. You're not thinking straight. Rewrite it. And they had to write one big paper, and they couldn't proceed to the second paragraph until they got the first one. And it was a social studies teacher, not an English teacher that was doing that. So if you had more teachers like that really focused on critical thinking. Yeah, no, I was going to say, that would...
I was just going to say, and critical thinking about social media, because I was thinking about that on the way over here. What are the larger issues? And, I think that kids need to be taught what social media is, because they don't know. The problem is it's going so fast that the kids see more and are further ahead than their parents and the teachers, right now. But I think critical thinking about social media, I don't think that's taught. And also civics. I mean, civics wasn't even taught when I was in high school. And I think we need to teach that now, the larger issues of democracy, how, what's expected of you in a democratic society. And I don't think that children are really getting that.
Yeah, I know it'd be difficult these days to teach the whole thing about the 3 separate branches of government. How Congress makes the laws.
Ancient history, right?
Teaching an education.
I think there's actually something very interesting going on in here, because there is actually, in this decline in trust in the dictates coming from old-fashioned institutions and a skepticism about that, there is also the germ of an opportunity, which is, and it's on us, frankly, if we get better at doing journalism which is authentic and which explains how we arrived at the conclusions that we arrived at, and sort of innately teaches the craft of interrogating what's presented as a fact and looking for answers in the right places and working out how a source is trustworthy and all of those good things. If we get better at actually being more transparent about our own craft, then I think there is enough natural skepticism and curiosity out there that if we can do that, and we can also work out how to be effectively on the platforms where all this stuff is being peddled, then we might be onto something. But it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy.
Yeah, I had a friend who knew nothing about newspaper journalism, and after she saw the movie Spotlight, she said to me, God, I had no idea reporters worked so hard.
We have a question back here.
Hi. This is a question for Glenn. In the last year, I have encouraged all my journalism friends and newspaper-loving friends not to cancel their Washington Post subscriptions because I didn't find that it was useful, felt like the wrong people would get hurt. That's getting a little bit harder to defend. I'm going to renew my subscription, but I'm wondering, where is the tipping point? When you see, I'm telling people, if you want to read the Washington Post, read the New York Times. It's getting harder and harder to make that argument, and I just wonder what you think about that.
Well, I think you have to really separate out the news side and the editorial section. The news side this year has done remarkable, great reporting about the dismantling of the federal government by the Trump administration. Scoop after scoop after scoop. And those were, a lot of really top-notch reporters left this year because of that buyout package. And I think that's a real loss. The people that are left there, though, are still working very hard. And they do really great work. And Bezos has never, ever interfered at all with the news side of the paper. Now, he's an owner, he's a newspaper owner, and newspaper owners always can dictate what the editorial page does and says. And I was surprised that Bezos didn't move earlier to take control of the editorial page. And he kind of left it alone for 10 years. And now, you know, they've basically fired everyone that worked on the editorial page, with the exception of 1 or 2 people. But there were 60 people there, and all those people have either been told to take a buyout or left or were fired. And it's going to be a right-of-center editorial page, kind of libertarian, but, you know, it's, and it's, so far what I've read, most of it is not particularly well argued or well reasoned. But that's the editorial page, you know, and you know, the Wall Street Journal does really great reporting. It has a very conservative editorial page, and the New York Times, even though my whole life I've competed against the New York Times, I have to admit they do a good job of reporting. But you know, you can look at I find the editorial page is a little, it's often kind of weak too. So I just, as a news reporter, don't pay that much attention to the editorial page. But the news side, for the moment, is still going strong. And you know, they don't charge much for the Washington Post. It's really a bargain if you think about it. If you think about how much money you might spend on coffee in the course of a year. The Washington Post is not that expensive. So I would encourage you to keep going. If ever there's a moment where the news side was interfered by the publisher or the owner, I guarantee you most of the people that now work there would immediately resign.
So,
What Glenn, I'm sorry, what Glenn means to say is, after you have paid your Times Union subscription, holding out your money.
The problem the Post faces is what I call the Avis problem. You know, the number 2. Because the New York Times, they have 10 million subscribers, and the New York Times is a pretty all-in-one package, and they certainly, the arts coverage, the Washington Post cannot compete with the arts coverage. The New York Times has the athletic, they have the cooking stuff. I mean, it's a lot, and for a lot of people out there, they say, well, I'm going to get one newspaper. I'll get my local newspaper, Times Union here in Albany, and I'll get one other paper. And the default is always going to be the New York Times. I mean, that's a struggle that the Post has. You have to be a really dedicated newspaper reader to want to get both the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Times Union.
so I had to resubscribe to the Washington Post to read Glenn's article in preparation for this panel, and it's good. It's surprisingly good, despite all, you know, the bad publicity about Bezos and people leaving. I like their daily email, the way it's set up. In some ways, it's almost more accessible than the New York Times. Sorry, Jay. And it's readable. It's a good product. Just saying.
You know what's completely free?
Yeah, what about your fund drive? Well, no, you don't want to search that.
We have a question right here.
Actually, it's not a question. It's an observation. When Casey Seiler listed the 4 points of that Rex Smith had said about the good journalism, reputable journalism, I was thinking that what runs through this discussion for me is that the question of some kind of ethical or moral bearing with regard to sort of how we treat each other is up for grabs, in the sense that it's hard to understand how people do the things they do if we sort of believe in, like, you know, sort of things like telling the truth or writing the truth or standing for certain core principles. And that is part of the fragmentation, it seems to me, that makes sort of a familiar social life so hard to achieve, so hard to find. And I just wanted to say that because that's one of the things that's okay. I know that AI is a terrible thing, and we could go on each of these, you know, for a long time, but I won't. It's the sort of the problem of dealing with people who don't care about these values that have been articulated. And I think that's about, you know, sort of the fragmentation of American society as it is in many other countries. It's just part of the world we're currently in.
I hear what you're saying. I wonder what the percentage of engaged American citizens is or has been at any given time in our history. In other words, you know, are most Americans, or most people around the world for that matter, just sort of moving through their lives, doing their jobs, not perhaps paying close attention to the news of the day, as journalists do. I mean, we are weirdos in that regard, in that we are, they talk now about people being too online. I mean, journalists have been sort of too online since they were children making newsletters in Cincinnati. So, but it's a fair point.
You have a question?
Hi. Actually, I don't have a question, but I bring along my soapbox. I have a serious complaint about the news media as a former journalist myself. It seems to me all too often when somebody in public life makes a statement, there is rarely an odd fact, so-called fact. There is rarely a follow-up demand. Could you provide the documented evidence to back that up? And the perfect example is a story I literally just read sitting in this chair moments ago, a story in the New York Times about this admiral who has stepped down, who was responsible for what's been going on in the Caribbean. And I have yet to see a reporter demand that the administration provide documented evidence to back those claims up. And the story that I just read by the New York Times doesn't even say that the administration has failed to produce any public documentary evidence that supports their claim that these were drug boats and that they were headed to the United States.
I don't think that's quite true. Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I think part of it is that story just came out. I'm sure they are asking.
But they could have said that in the story,
Yeah,
that
well,
the
maybe they're in the process of asking.
Yeah, well,
I mean, I would withhold judgment till like tomorrow, when they have a little more time.
well, I always joke that it's not conspiracy, it's incompetence.
what?
It's not conspiracy, it's incompetence. You know, when the newspaper, I mean, I'm not just laying aside this particular story, but if you know, reporters are overworked, underpaid, I would argue, and things slip through. And usually it's not because there's some particular determined reason to do that. It's just because, you know, it's something slipped through the cracks. But the thing that you're asking for is, this is what I did every day at the fact checker. Is I would take a statement and then put that statement, the claims made in that statement, under scrutiny. And the system worked well because there would be that news story, and then there would be separately, as a complement to that news story, my fact check. It would be able to go more in depth and lay out those issues. So if I were still at the Washington Post, it's quite possible, not the same day, but the next day, I would be doing a piece that would lay out, here's what the administration has said, here's what the evidence is, here's you know, and then we make an assessment. So that was the whole point of the fact checker column, was to provide that level of scrutiny, which you couldn't do in a news story necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I feel your frustration, and I think we all do. There is, having said that, since we're in the cone of silence, such a tidal wave of bullshit out there at the moment, that really you have to, you know, there aren't enough journalists in the world to fact check everything as fast as we would like to, but I'm going to go Pollyanna-ish on you again, so prepare yourselves. The thing that I try to bear in mind is that this is a process. It doesn't have to be done in a single moment. Everything that is claimed is out there, and we have the time and the resources to test that and, as a society, arrive at a conclusion about it, a consensus about it, which is based on the information which is uncovered over a period of time. And the biggest, most dramatic example I can think of to illustrate that is, Watergate didn't get uncovered in a day. It took a long time, a lot of work went into it. There were a lot of moments which were frustrating and depressing, I'm sure, for those involved in that effort. And yet, in the end, we got there.
I was going to say, in all credit to Woodward and Bernstein, we also got there because of a very courageous judge, Judge Zureka, and the processes of, there was the General Accounting Office, there were other aspects, and there was, people at the a source at the FBI that wanted to expose things. So, it was all elements of civil society working together to expose something. And I really wonder what would happen now if something like Watergate.
Glenn, I'm trying to cheer people up.
Yeah. but I would just like to say on the attacks on votes, journalists are asking for that proof. They are, and the fact that the administration is not providing it is included in almost all of the stories that I have read about this.
Not
Journalists
this one.
cannot, well, that's why I said most, but journalists are asking those questions. If the administration won't provide the answers, that's on the administration, it's not on the journalists. It is on the journalists to say, the administration is claiming this, we have asked for evidence, they have not provided the evidence, we will continue to ask for the evidence. But that's not on the journalists.
I just want to see that in every story that talks about these boats.
Sure.
But I don't see it in every
Understood.
story. And this goes to other stories as well, where reporters either don't ask the question or they ask it and they don't get an answer.
Absolutely.
Then it has to be put in the story.
Right, and there's nothing more maddening than watching those White House, the Oval Office Q&As, and you're like, ask a follow-up question, for God's sake. So, yeah, I hear you.
We have a question back here. Well, first, I just want to thank you for what you do. Hi, Casey. It's a very difficult job being a reporter and being an editor, and it's poorly paid, I'll tell you that. And so I really respect what you do, and it's a labor of love, so thank you for what you do. I have two questions. The first is just for Casey. I'm always yelling at my vast number of nieces and nephews to read curated news, all right? And I was wondering whether there's anybody out there, like the Society of Professional Journalists or other body, that somehow accreditates news sites as being handled in a way and managed in a way consistent with high journalistic standards. The second question is for all of you. And back in the 30s, Huey Long claimed that he'd have no problem beating Roosevelt in the 1936 presidential election. When asked how, he said, "I can just outpromise him." All right? And now we see all that happening again and again today, and on. Like, I'm going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, right? Or something to that effect. How do fact checkers effectively deal with these fantastical promises that are made by people that fall into the realm of populism generally? They'll say anything, they promise anything, and people believe them. How do you handle that type of thing, where it's very hard to pin it down as a direct falsehood? Thank you.
I'll take the first one, and then I'll hand it up. On the question of, is there or should there be an accrediting agency? I don't think so. I think that's a bad idea. The First Amendment and freedom of the press doesn't come with sort of a guild, stamp of approval, and I don't think it should. There are obviously all kinds of questions, and Karen and I would, down at the Capitol, deal with people who were sort of a little bit on the cusp of actually being journalists, but they would call themselves journalists, and there is obviously journalists. Some of them are more within the advocacy camp. That doesn't mean they don't follow all of those SPJ tenets, but no, I don't think, I would not want there to be a professional guild that gives somebody the stamp of approval, because God knows I would never want any kind of government entity to say, yes, you are a journalist. I mean, when Karen and I worked at the Capitol, we had passes that were given to us. I was just telling somebody a story about Karen being hassled as you were passing through the teleportation portal one time because they didn't have the pass to get into the Capitol. It was like battering on the... Yes, she remembers this story. This person is back in the news down at the Capitol these days. I'll tell you about that in a second. But it's interesting because, I'll tell a very quick anecdote. A couple of weeks ago, a person who had been trying to get stories about herself removed from the Times-Union or disappeared from our website, and we have certain processes that we go to consider those types of requests to de-index the story so it's not responsive to Google. And the stories that we had written about this person, we were just not going to disappear from the web. And so this person escalated it and finally reached out to the ethics committee chair at SBJ and said, the Times-Union needs to face consequences because they're not taking down these stories about me. And the ethics chair got back and did a very thoughtful response and said, I read all their stories. They seem to be responsible. They followed your brush with law enforcement all the way to the end. They didn't leave anything hanging. So it's really up to them. SBJ doesn't tell media outlets when to remove a story or take it down. We provide guidelines, but it's completely up to the individual media entities to do that. And I thought that was very thoughtful, and I appreciated it, but at the same time, I was like, I don't care what they say about it.
Yeah, there is an organization called NewsGuard, which was set up by Stephen Brill, who created The American Lawyer, and a guy from the Wall Street Journal, Elward Krowitz. I believe they do assessments of different news organizations about how, in terms of factual accuracy. So they, for instance, the Gateway Pundit, they're very critical of the Gateway Pundit for its lax standards of accuracy and that sort of thing. So, I mean, that's just an independent organization, but that NewsGuard is intended to help raise people's level of awareness about what are quality news websites and what are not quality news websites.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of something that your nieces and nephews would be interested in that wouldn't seem too dry for them. I mean, New York State News has a kind of curated site called the Empire page. Although sometimes when I was working journalist, I would look at what they were promoting as a headline and I'd say, oh, that looks really interesting. I want to read that. And then I would see it was my own story. Just a little bit in the headline. And I was like, okay. So I don't know, podcasts maybe for them. Certain ones that don't take you down a rabbit hole that, summarize things in a more palatable way, maybe for younger people. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts for that reason. And sometimes, to be honest, to sometimes filter the news, because I really don't want to watch a whole White House press event anymore like I used to. And sometimes I want somebody that I trust to kind of filter it for me. But yeah, that can go down rabbit holes too. So I guess I don't have a really good answer for that.
So, just quickly on your question about tracking promises. Promise trackers are a big feature of a lot of fact-checking websites. We, in the first term, we tracked a whole bunch of Trump promises. PolitiFact currently is tracking all sorts of Trump promises, and it goes through rather methodically, like, has he taken action? Here's what he promised in the campaign. Has he taken action on it? Is it stalled? Has it happened? That sort of thing. So it is tracked.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Okay, I'm a retired librarian, and so I'm a firm believer in following one's sources. And one thing that I came across while I was still working was a site called Ad Fontes Media Bias Chart. Maps out various the basically rainbow of media sites with accuracy, bias on either side. I mean, the mainstream media basically comes up center. Times NPR, Politico, Politico on a slightly left side, and The Hill on the slightly right side. And the ones way over on the side, like Occupy Democrats and Newsmax and things like that, it's a useful point to run stuff to. I mean, if I see something looks crazy on social media, I mean, I remember to read the article, see if there's a source. Follow the source, the original link, and then run that source through whatever. But that's one of those things of that requires time and time and interest in following the rabbit trail, and media literacy and information literacy is one of those things that. Really needs to be more stressed for this whole society.
It's great that you're doing that. I mean, most people just simply say, "Oh, I'll share this," and move on. But that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, it goes back to what Glenn was saying earlier about critical thinking. Teaching critical thinking so that's more of an automatic reaction instead of some foreign thing that you don't know about.
Okay, I think that about wraps it up. Can we have a round of applause?
Thank you all very much for coming. It's great to have you in the Hearst Media Center. Please get some Museum of Political Corruption swag on your way out, and I hope you'll come back again. We really appreciate it.
Good night.
I'm new to the area.
All right. Stop it. I think we're good here. Excellent.
We do, Jay. So great to meet you. My apologies for all the op-eds I get it. It was great. It was always it was wonderful.
Yeah, I would say that's good.
Journalists, some of them are more within the advocacy camp. That doesn't mean they don't follow all of those SPJ tenets. But no, I don't think I would not want there to be a professional guild that gives somebody the stamp of approval, because God knows I would never want any kind of government entity to say, yes, you are a journalist. I mean, when Karen and I worked at the Capitol, we had passes that were given to us. I was just telling somebody a story about Karen being hassled as you were passing through the teleportation portal one time, because they didn't have the pass to get into the Capitol. It was like battering on the... Yes, she remembers this story. This person's back in the news down at the Capitol these days. I'll tell you about that in a second. But it's interesting because, I'll tell a very quick anecdote. A couple of weeks ago, a person who had been trying to get stories about herself removed from the Times-Union or disappeared from our website, and we have certain processes that we go to consider those types of requests, to de-index a story so it's not responsive to Google. And the stories that we had written about this person, we were just not going to disappear from the web. And so this person escalated it and finally reached out to the ethics committee chair at SBJ and said, the Times-Union needs to face consequences because they're not taking down these stories about me. And the ethics chair got back and did a very thoughtful response and said, I read all their stories. They seem to be responsible. They followed your brush with law enforcement all the way to the end. They didn't leave anything hanging. So it's really up to them. SBJ doesn't tell media outlets when to remove a story or take it down. We provide guidelines, but it's completely up to the individual media entities to do that. And I thought that was very thoughtful, and I appreciated it, but at the same time I was like, I don't care what they say about it.
Yeah, there is an organization called NewsGuard, which was set up by Stephen Brill, who had created The American Lawyer, and a guy from the Wall Street Journal, Elgort Krovitz. I believe they do assessments of different news organizations about how, in terms of factual accuracy. So they, for instance, the Gateway Pundit, they're very critical of the Gateway Pundit for its lax standards of accuracy and that sort of thing. So, I mean, that's just an independent organization, but that NewsGuard is intended to help raise people's level of awareness about what are quality news websites and what are not quality news websites.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of something that your nieces and nephews would be interested in that wouldn't seem too dry for them. I mean, New York State News has a kind of curated site called the Empire page. Although sometimes when I was working journalist, I would look at what they were promoting as a headline and I'd say, oh, that looks really interesting. I want to read that. And then I would see it was my own story. Just a little bit in the headline. Okay. So, I don't know, podcasts maybe for them? Certain ones that don't take you down a rabbit hole that, summarize things in a more palatable way, maybe for younger people. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts for that reason. And sometimes, to be honest, to sometimes filter the news, because I really don't want to watch a whole White House press event anymore like I used to. And sometimes I want somebody that I trust to kind of filter it for me. But yeah, that can go down rabbit holes too. So I guess I don't have a really good answer for that.
So, just quickly on your question about tracking promises. Promise trackers are a big feature of a lot of fact-checking websites. We, in the first term, we tracked a whole bunch of Trump promises. PolitiFact currently is tracking all sorts of Trump promises, and it goes through rather methodically, like, has he taken action? Here's what he promised in a campaign. Has he taken action on it? Is it stalled? Has it happened? That sort of thing. So it is tracked.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Okay, I'm a retired librarian, and so I'm a firm believer in following one's sources. And one thing that I came across while I was still working was a site called Ad Fontes Media Bias Chart. Maps out various the basically rainbow of media sites with accuracy, bias on either side. I mean, the mainstream media basically comes up center, Times, Times, NPR, Politico, Politico on a slightly left side, and The Hill on the slightly right side, and the ones way over on the side, like Occupy Democrats and Newsmax and things like that. It's a useful point to run stuff to. I mean, if I see something looks crazy on social media, I mean, I remember to read the article, see if there's a source, follow the source, the original link, and then run that source through whatever. But that's one of those things of that requires time and time and interest in following the rabbit trail, and media literacy and information literacy is one of those things that really needs to be more stressed for this whole society.
It's great that you're doing that. I mean, most people just say, "Oh, I'll share this," and move on. But that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, it goes back to what Glenn was saying earlier about critical thinking. Teaching critical thinking so that's more of an automatic reaction instead of some foreign thing that you don't know about.
Okay, I think that about wraps it up. Can we have a round of applause for congratulations.
Thank you all very much for coming. It's great to have you in the Hearst Media Center. Please get some Museum of Political Corruption swag on your way out, and I hope you'll come back again. We really appreciate it.
Good night.